Today, I'm joined by Jan Sramek. Jan is the CEO of California Forever. California Forever is a super interesting new endeavor to build not just a couple shipyards or some number of shipyards and a foundry where manufacturing work can support those yards, but an entire city all up in Solano County, just east of San Francisco in California. The prospect of building a new shipyard seems daunting in the first place, but the entire endeavor itself really interesting, and I can't wait to talk to him about what those barriers are, what the overall process looks like, and then how does that work? California's a tough place to do this type of thing, but where will the workforce come from? All the things that you can imagine related to a new shipyard. So I'm really excited about this conversation, and hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Rebuilding the Fleet, where we engage the people, voices, and ideas behind America's maritime reboot at the intersection of technology and manufacturing. I'm your host, Austin Gray, former Navy intelligence officer and co-founder of Blue Water Autonomy. You'll be led this week by Tim Glenatsis, who's been building ships for 25 years, from amphibs to destroyers, and now the unmanned warships of the U.S. Navy's future fleet. It's time for some shipbuilding. Here we go.
Welcome to Rebuilding the Fleet. Today, I'm joined by Jan Sramek.
It's great to be here.
It is really great to have you. Jan is the CEO of California Forever, a super ambitious project in California. Can't wait to hear more about that, Jan. Can you tell us just what is California Forever?
Yeah, California Forever is a company that is doing something that we used to do all the time, and then we stopped doing it about 60 years ago, which was to build new cities. I founded the company almost 10 years ago, and we've acquired almost 70,000 acres. So that's over 100 square miles.
10 years ago?
Yeah, it's been a long time. It takes if you're trying to put together 100 square miles an hour north of Silicon Valley on the border, it takes a long time to buy the land. And so we had to put it together in 700 transactions over 8 years, and it took a long time. But what it allows us to do today is to think at a massive scale about everything, about solving all of these big challenges that California and America have more broadly. And so we're building a new city. And I would say there's three main pillars to it, just to cue it up. We have what we call the Solano Foundry, which would be the largest advanced manufacturing park in America.
Okay.
Really dedicated to all of these companies that right now invent stuff in Silicon Valley, and then they come to build it, and they can't build it in California. They have to end up going to other parts of the country, which really slows down the pace of innovation. We are building the Solano Shipyard, which we'll talk about more. And then the third part of it is an incredible new downtown and neighborhoods with about 175,000 homes, so about 400,000 people at scale.
Wow. So those three things, you said, I don't think anybody talks to anyone who says we're building a city. Like, you just never hear that very often.
Yeah.
But you've addressed, with those three things, sort of the pillars that are necessary for a city to exist.
Yeah, I mean, you need jobs and you need homes, and ideally you balance them out. And I found the discourse about this funny over the last couple of years, because it was a little bit controversial a couple of years ago, not so much now. And people say, why do we need a new city? And I think first of all, it's obvious in California why you need one. You can't build factories, you can't build shipyards, you can't build homes. But bigger than that, basically every new city in America is a new city. I mean, by the standards of the old world, every city here is 100, 200, 300 years old. And so we used to do this all the time. And so it's kind of coming full circle to doing that again.
There's a bunch about the city planning stuff. I've heard you talk before about walkable cities, things that I think people who visit Europe really appreciate that we don't have here in the States. And maybe you could just talk about that briefly, because I know we need to talk about the shipbuilding stuff primarily, but maybe you could just talk about the city approach there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we actually do have a lot of this in the US, but we primarily have it on the East Coast. And so you look at places like Georgetown or Brooklyn or Philadelphia or Boston or Chicago, or at a smaller scale, places like Charleston or Savannah. At least the older parts of those cities are really wonderful and walkable. The problem is on the West Coast, it basically doesn't exist outside of parts of San Francisco, parts of Santa Monica. And I looked at this once, and less than 1% of neighborhoods in California are walkable. by any reasonable
believe it.
standard. And so what that means, by the way, is because there's now a lot of people who want to live in those places, that's why the prices get bid up, both price of homes and the rent. And what that means is only the very wealthy can afford to live in a walkable neighborhood, which I think is just unacceptable. And I think it does tie actually to shipbuilding question, because you look at some of the challenges that we've learned about in the existing yards. Well, commuting is a huge issue. It's a massive problem to get 20,000 people in a shipyard and deal with a shift change, and then people have to commute from 2 hours away, and worker retention is a massive issue. That's what I hear from everyone. And so there is a deep tie in that if you can create an incredible place where people can afford to buy a home, and then you can create a place that is 10-minute drive from the shipyard, and ideally you can run a shuttle so people don't have to get out in the cars in the first place, you can really start to create this ecosystem that makes it much easier to do other things like build ships.
It seems, I think that model is maybe used widely in Korea and some other places today. Is there inspiration there?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We'll put up a map on the screen, but if you look at the geographical kind of layout of our holdings, we own about 100 square miles. It's basically this kind of round shape. The Foundry and we're calling it the Solano Living, the neighborhoods and the downtown are kind of in the north 1/3. And then the shipyard is on the south side, 7 miles south of there, which is exactly how the Koreans build it. I mean, the way that the Koreans and then the Chinese have been able to build these massive shipyards that have way more capacity and production than we do is to build a shipyard, you have to build a city at the back of it.
Right.
It's the only way to get people there. And so we are building something that's quite similar to it. And that's the way it works in other places, by the way. I mean, you look at, I was speaking to Craig Hooper on our team, and he just came back from Helsinki, and he was telling me about how the shipyard is literally in downtown Helsinki, in the middle of the city still.
It's fascinating. And honestly, there are a couple places in the country where that might have once been the case, but certainly not today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fine balance where if you have a shipyard that the city then kind of encroaches upon and you build houses and condos all the way to the edge of it, then for safety regulations, noise, getting to it, expansion, it becomes very difficult, right? Mm-hmm. It's impossible to expand it.
That's right.
If you come in and you say, we want to install a 400-foot tall gantry crane, the neighborhood is going to be up in the arms. There's no way.
Noise.
All of those
stuff.
Constraints, right? Getting an air permit is difficult. On the other hand, you clearly don't want the shipyard to be in the middle of nowhere where there's no workforce. Right. And so there's kind of an optimum distance where it's far away that there's no neighbors complaining, but close enough that you can actually get people into the yard. And that's one of the really interesting aspects of our site, where I think within 5 miles of the proposed shipyard, there's 25 people living there. Wow. And so you really can run construction 24/7. Nobody's going to complain about you building a tall structure and so on.
So I'm really curious at how you got into this. Like how, because I think your background, you were in banking before, right?
I was in finance, and then I was in technology.
So how'd you end up doing this?
I grew up in Eastern Europe in a really blue-collar community. Actually, in the one country in the West, or kind of Central Europe is part of the Western world that really retained a manufacturing culture. And so if you look today at the countries in the world in the Western world that have the highest proportion of people who work in manufacturing, Germany, the Czech Republic, Austria, rank very highly. They kind of managed to retain it. And so my uncles are CNC machinists. My dad is a car mechanic. My brother works in construction. And so grew up with that culture, wanted to come to the US and California my whole life. And then had a chance to live in the UK and in Switzerland for a period of time. And then I finally got here in 2013. And I was coming in with this vision of California as this place that could build anything, right? What California used to be. And what I realized quickly in 2013 is that I got here about 32 years too late for the California that could build the Golden Gate Bridge in 4 years, and that could build millions of homes for people and these great public works. And it was just this odd shock to the system where, on the one hand, in the digital world, Silicon Valley was more dominant than ever, and there was massive progress on all fronts. On the other hand, companies were beginning to leave California, and people couldn't afford to live there. And it was like, this just makes no sense. And so this interest became an obsession over time. And I just went on this deep dive of how the hell did we get here? And it's a very complex and layered story of how California got to where it is. But in about 2015, I decided to work on it. And I spent about a year working on how do we build more in existing cities.
Okay.
The depressing conclusion of that was that wouldn't be enough. And just physically, there was no way. And so then I thought, well, what if you started a new city that would be at the edge of the Bay Area, so you could really draw on the network effect that exists there. And coincidentally, 4 months before I had that idea, I'd come through Solano County to go fishing, to actually fish on the Sacramento Delta where the shipyard would be. And so I remembered driving through this incredible expanse of open land, which wasn't farmland, it wasn't orchards, it wasn't apricots, it wasn't habitat, it wasn't park. It was just this low-grade grazing land that seemed perfect to build whatever California wanted.
So I know we got to get to the shipbuilding stuff.
Let's do it.
And so, in your mind, what's most over when you think about shipbuilding and sort of the condition in the country? Can you talk about what do you think is the most overlooked element of the problem? I think everybody accepts we have a shipbuilding problem. Today we got to catch up, all that stuff. What do you think is most overlooked there? So
first of all, to set the table, I'm no expert on shipbuilding. I learned a lot in the last 2 years. But what I've seen when people started talking about this 2 years ago is kind of it's also the origin story of the proposed Solano Shipyard, which is everyone talks about how we need to build more ships. Not many people talking about the fact that to build that many more ships, we'll need a lot more new shipyards.
Right. And
that's kind of where this whole thing started, where I didn't have an idea to build a shipyard in 2016 or 2017 when I started the company. I felt strongly that we needed a place where we could build whatever was needed, factories, homes, whatever else. And what I knew is that we owned, as part of the assembly, about 6.5 miles of waterfront that had long been designated for water-dependent industrial uses. Actually, going back all the way to the 80s, when the government designated it as the largest remaining vacant site on the West Coast for maritime uses.
That seems like it's going to be half the battle, just having that designation in the first place. It's not marshland or something else. Right?
Exactly. And it's been that since the 80s, designated by the local government, by regional governments. So when we were buying the land, I didn't know what we would need to do there, but I thought it was important to own it. Now, what happened in 2023 is I started reading about everyone saying we need to build more ships, build more ships, build more ships. People are beginning to start companies to build more ships, and nobody's building new shipyards. Mm-hmm. And I kind of started looking at it. I'm like, we've shut down half the shipyards we had, or more of them. The existing ones, everyone is saying that they are full. Where are all of these new ships going to get built? Particularly if you want to build a modern yard and you want to lay it out differently and so on. And so that was the foundation of the idea. And I would say in the year and a half, 2 years we've been working on this really actively, that to me is still the biggest unknown. Is a lot of talk about shipbuilding, but if you try to list people who are trying to build a new yard, there are some people who are repurposing existing yards. But new yards, I mean, I think we are one of the only ones, and at this scale, certainly the only one.
And I imagine the capital involved in trying to stand up a new shipyard's got to be just monumental.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I will say from the research that we've done and from the conversations that we've had with all the different stakeholders in the maritime industrial base, the government, different branches of the government, shipbuilders, financiers, the hardest part that we've seen is actually just finding a good site.
Makes sense, yeah.
Because it's you can build a factory to build drones anywhere in America. You can't build ships in Arizona. You reduce the number of possible sites by a huge margin. And then if you look at what have we done with the best places to build shipyards naturally have developed into cities, because that's where we started cities 200 years ago or 150 years ago. And then some of them survived, but those are full and they are encroached. And others we've shut down and we've replaced them with condos. So for example, in the Bay Area, we used to have 6 shipyards, which makes sense. It's on the Pacific and it's the best natural harbor in America.
Right.
But in the 90s, we shut down Treasure Island, Hunters Point, Mare Island. We used to also have Richmond and Marin Ship. Those are shut down as well. Right. And so I remember going through this process of what do you need on a site to build a shipyard? It's a long list. Right. I mean, you need a massive site that hasn't been developed, that isn't a natural park or some kind of natural preserve, that doesn't have rare species, that is on deep water, ideally on the Pacific, because that's where the shortage really is. But also it can't be in the middle of nowhere, because then you can't find the workforce. So you need an area where there's some ideally a lot of workforce, educational institutions, transportation infrastructure. You need ideally a railroad that goes to the shipyard, the supplier ecosystem. And then ideally, you really care about the geology. I mean, many of these areas, you look at the coastline of California, it's basically rocks into the ocean.
Right,
There's
right.
no way that you can build on that. And so you start listing, and then ideally, especially if you want to start a new ecosystem and build something that might have the scale of a Korean yard one day, or multiple Korean yards, you need thousands and thousands of acres. And to what we've been able to find, there's basically nowhere to do this. I mean, 500 acres you can find in a few places, but even then, very rare for them to hit all of the criteria that I just listed.
Right.
So I think that's the challenge. If you have that, and then if you have orders, and we can get to that, then I think the financing can be solved, particularly with the big commitments coming out of places like Korea and Japan to invest in this.
Well, and that's great perspective. I think everybody looks at it's easy to see the stuff in a shipyard. So you got to have cranes and you got to have cutting machines and robots and things like that. But all of the requirements that make a shipyard location good are often lost. In California, I mean, as you said, that they're I think Mare Island may be the only one that's still sort of around from the list of places they closed.
That's right, but even there, they've started building homes now. They've built a few hundred homes on Mare Island.
Is that
right? Yeah.
So what does, just thinking about the overall endeavor, what's success look like, for California Forever? What's that picture?
At the city scale, success looks like, well, let me ask this question. On what horizon?
Yeah,
on what time horizon?
I actually meant to ask you that. But that's a great point. So let's say 5 years. Where are we in 5 years?
In 5 years, we are targeting being able to break ground, roughly speaking, in the next 2.5 years.
Okay.
And that's without any kind of special acceleration for national security reasons, which has been discussed. But on a normal timeline, hopefully break ground in 2 to 3 years. And then after that, first people are moving in about 12 months.
Okay.
In terms of the homes, you can obviously build a factory in about 12 months as well. And so 5 years from now, we hopefully have 10,000 people living in the initial neighborhood.
Okay.
There's a few factories that have been built in the Solano Foundry. And then there are a couple of shipbuilders operating in the proposed Solano Shipyard. I think that timeline, there's certainly multiple discussions happening at all levels of government about how do we shorten the timeline given the national security.
Sure, and I want to talk about that. It's Travis Air Force Base that's there, right? Yeah,
that's right.
How much benefit does the idea get being close to the base? Is there any relationship between California Forever?
Yeah, in a huge way. So Travis Air Force Base is, I think, very recognized in the military community, but outside of it, or even outside of the Air Force community, people may not know how important it is. So Travis is the biggest air mobility command in America. So for cargo, refueling, and medical evac, it's the biggest base. And it's the biggest base by a factor of, I think, 2.5.
Okay.
So just to demonstrate how important it is, 45% of the munitions that go to Ukraine go through Travis, even though Travis is on the wrong coast.
Right.
And so and for any conflict in the Pacific, the first 10% of whatever we fly out there is going to go through Travis Air Force Base. We also have a second installation that's really important, which is on the south end from the shipyard, is the Army's Military Marine Ocean Terminal Concord, MOTCO. Okay. Which is a roll-on wharf installation where you would actually load up a bunch of the cargo that is coming out of places, the munitions depots in the Sierras and so on, to go into the Pacific. And the shipyard would basically be 10 miles from Travis and 10 miles from the MOTCO. So it creates this really interesting triad. I think in terms of the practical implications, a bunch of the stuff that you might need to get into the shipyard, particularly if it's classified, you could fly into Travis. Then there's a rail that goes by Travis into the shipyard. That's one. The second one that I think is even more important maybe is the workforce. Travis employs, I think, 12,000 people. So you think about the pipeline of, number one, spouses, and number two, of the retirees from Travis, who are very qualified to go and work in a shipyard. It's an incredible recruiting source. And then because of the quality of life in California and in Solano County, what happens often is people who serve on Travis, if it's their last duty, many of them stay. And if it's not, many of them come back. And so again, from a recruiting perspective, it's very powerful.
Okay. And so that I think a lot of people are curious about the workforce question. Mm-hmm. I think that point about Travis is really good. How do you think about, and again, maybe in just the foundry and shipyard context, where you have high concentrations of trades. Where will they come from? And what's the thought there?
Solano County and the neighboring region is really the place where in Northern California, people who work in the trades, in manufacturing, and in logistics live. So, for example, many of the people who are building office towers and houses in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco live in Solano County.
Okay.
But right now, they get up at 4 a.m. in the morning to beat the traffic, go to the job site, and they drive for an hour and a half, and then they come back. And they hate it. And so the huge opportunity for anyone coming to build, whether it's drones or components or ships in Solano County, is your recruiting pitch is, how would you like to have a 20-minute commute? That's the end of your recruiting pitch. And we've seen that. I mean, we have deep contacts with the community. I live there. We've obviously running this process to entitle the project. One of the biggest reasons why people like the project is they are sick of commuting.
Yeah.
And more broadly, what's misunderstood about Northern California is, or not appreciated, in the area between San Jose and Sacramento, there's 12 million people who live there.
Yeah.
12 million. If it was a state, it would be the 7th largest state in America. And so we obviously have shipyards getting built on the Gulf Coast. You go to many of these communities, there's 100,000 people who live there, or 200,000 people who live there within a commuting distance, maybe 400,000 in some of the bigger places. So if you're trying to build a shipyard that has 10,000 employees, where are they going to come from?
Yeah.
You're going to employ 10% of the county. Whereas here, within 50 miles of the shipyard site, there's 750,000 people who work just in skilled trades, logistics, and manufacturing.
Okay.
750,000 people. There's 5.1 million people who live in the workforce, and many of them are underemployed. The other part about it is, in some of these Gulf states, unemployment is 2%. It's 6.5% in California.
Right.
And so there's this counterintuitive thing about, for the right employer at the right location with the right job offering, it's a really interesting place to build.
So when you think about the biggest challenges so far, this conversation leads me to that question. But what have been the hardest things to work out here as you're looking forward?
So it's been almost 10 years now. I think in the beginning, certainly raising money to build a new city was pretty challenging. So much so that when I first tried to raise the money, nobody would invest. And so the only reason why this happened is I took everything. I believed in it so much. I took everything that I had. I borrowed a irresponsible amount of money, and I bet it all on the fact that I would be able to raise the next round. Otherwise, I would have been personally.
And you've since done quite well with raising, right?
We've raised over $1 billion. But I think the fanaticism of me saying I believe in it so much that, unlike most startups, I'm actually going to go and kind of personally do this, is what got some of the early investors over the line. And we've had a fantastic set of investors who really believe in California, really believe in America and building things. But
high profile. It's a very high profile team.
It is a good team. It is a good team. So I think raising the money was one difficult thing. The other one was just having the patience to spend 7 years quietly acquiring the land, where there were many temptations along the way to say, okay, we have 20,000 acres and that's enough to build a community and maybe a manufacturing park. We don't need more. But I had a really strong belief from the beginning that there are huge economies of scale of being able to do this at a bigger scale. And for example, if we had stopped along the way halfway through, we would have owned 35,000 acres, but no shipyard. That acquisition was quite late in the process. And so I think having the patience to get the full area basically and being able to do it right. And then the last couple of years and we coming to the end of that period is, obviously if you come to a community and you propose something of this scale, that's controversial. And so over the last couple of years, it's been communicating clearly who we are, why are we doing this, the fact that we care, the fact that this is not some come in and rezone it and flip it, but we actually want to build it over 40 years, addressing the legitimate community concerns around where is the water going to come from and what about the roads and what is the balance in terms of governance.
Are these like public hearings, that kind of thing? I mean, how are you?
Yeah, I mean, some of them are public hearings. A lot of it is just conversations. Okay. It's just sitting over coffee with someone, particularly the community leaders, and saying this is how we think about it. A lot of it is about building trust. I mean, we were outsiders in the community. We've and so people kind of had a reasonable basis to be skeptical in the beginning, and so it takes time to build that. And then I think it's particularly combined with, it was very obvious how you would get to this build if you were willing to work on the California timeline, which is we're going to go through 15 years of planning and hearings, and then we'll break ground in 15 years.
Right.
But we were we were trying to not just get the community to buy into it, but buy into it and say, we should do this on a short timeline, which obviously kind of makes the whole thing so much more complex. But I think we've succeeded at that. And so now it's really getting the permission and being able to break ground.
So I'm not sure how many states have this situation, but you must have an EIR or a,
we do.
Yeah, environmental impact report.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's tough. I mean, California is very tough anytime you're doing anything near the water. Probably tough in general, but particularly near the water. Is that the type of thing that you're having to work through?
Yeah, we do. So we have a couple of approaches to this. So the one that's actually in process right now is, so there's a different story for the shipyard and for Solano Foundry and Solano Living.
Okay.
And the difference is the Solano Shipyard had been intended there since the 80s. And so actually the county did the county, when it last revised its general plan in 2008, they did an EIR for the shipyard. And so now the discussion is, does that existing EIR cover whoever wants to come and build ships? And there's ways to make that happen. And part of this is the question of national security implications. And do we, as the state, want to say this should be covered, or do we need to do additional review and so on? But the shipyard starts from a really good place where the county's general plan calls for 6 million square feet of basically maritime industrial uses on that location, which is a huge benefit in the permitting process, in that it's already been approved and studied and litigated or not litigated, but you don't have the risk of getting sued over the new EIR. Okay. So that's a very different story. What we're doing for the Foundry and for Solano Living which is 175,000 homes plus about 100 million square feet of largely advanced manufacturing space, office space, commercial space. We basically creating a place where we do all of the permitting upfront. And so we're going through entitlements for all of that at the same time. We're writing, or the city is writing, what will be probably the biggest environmental impact report in the history of the state of California. So I think it's tracking at 18,000 pages or something right now. Oh my gosh. The benefit of that is we're going to go through one big debate, one big review, but once it's approved, if a company wants to come in and build a factory, they can just go and get a building permit. They don't have to do an EIR because we've kind of pre-cleared it, which is very important for someone like a shipbuilder in the shipyard, because if they say, hey, we have this supplier and we really want them to build a new factory and we don't want to build it on the water because that's more expensive, we want to build it at the foundry, which is very close, then the supplier can get a building permit in 60 days.
So would you say that you have momentum in a way that is atypical for California?
Yeah, in a really big way. I mean, I think my bet when I started almost 10 years ago was that things in California would get worse for a while, and then it would get so bad that basically the state would get pulled to the middle and saying, hey, we need to rethink some of these laws that have been in place. Because many of these laws were well-intentioned when they were put in place. Environmental laws, regulatory process, and so on. But I've started to describe it as, I think having 2 glasses of wine is a pretty good idea. I think having 50 glasses of wine is a pretty bad idea. And that's kind of the regulations in California. And people have come to realize that we are now suffering from the hangover. And that's actually happened. So if you look at California in the last 2 years, it's passed the most sweeping set of land use regulations, deregulations actually, that they've done in 50 years. Solano County is an even stronger example of that, because our project kind of forced a bigger debate about who the county wanted to be. And they decided, actually, we do want to be the manufacturing center of California. Actually, we do want to bring shipbuilding back to Solano County. Mare Island was the first shipyard on the West Coast. That's in Solano County.
Yeah.
For example, one specific data point is all 7 cities in Solano County have passed resolutions at the city level saying we want to do everything we can to bring shipbuilding back to Solano. And these were not close votes. This was 7-0, 6-1, 5-1. And so there's incredible momentum by any standards, and especially by California standards.
So if somebody, let's say somebody has a clear need for a shipyard, and they come tomorrow, Jan, we have the capital. How long? There's
an active discussion. I can't get into too much detail, but I think by the end of Q1, Q2 next year, through change to regulations, we'll be in a position where they could break ground within 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
That's not the case today, but there's a discussion about basically making sure that, particularly for national security reasons, people get to rely on that old existing environmental document. And if that happens, then you can go pretty quickly.
And in terms of the land itself. Like you talk, I know like soil composition and things like that matter a lot when you're thinking about, loading and, cement and cranes and all the rest. Yeah. How's that?
It's excellent. It's the firm that we work with on a lot of this is a firm called NGO. It's run by a guy called Uri Eliyahu. NGO has done an incredible amount of work for the Navy. They work on most of the major installations, most of the major shipyards, most of the major dry docks getting built. They also build really complex structures like the whole rebuilding of Treasure Island in the middle of the San Francisco Bay, the Lucas Museum, which in an earthquake needs to not destroy the $3 billion of art that sits in it. And so they are engineers. And the way that Uri puts it to me is we've been working on these mega projects all over the country and all over the Pacific, by the way. They work in Guam and Hawaii for 50 years. And we've never seen a site that is as suitable for building of a major shipyard as this site.
Wow.
And a couple of reasons for why. Number one, there are 1,100 aging windmills on the site today.
Okay.
That are between 400 and 600 feet tall. And you can think about, in order to be able to put a windmill, even with subsidies, profitably, you need a place that's really easy to build. You need to be able to put up a 400-foot tall structure that has massive wind pressure on it all the time. And you can't spend some crazy amount of money putting that in, right? So that just is a physical demonstration of the fact that you can build that cheaply. Another great one is because of the scale of the site, we have two possible designs for the shipyard, which we could combine. Number one is you could do classic kind of waterfront, waterside piers and bulkheads and build into it. But the other one is, because we have so much land behind it, we could actually cut inland bays into the soil that we have. And if we do that, if you think about building something like a dry dock, why are the dry docks so expensive to build in the existing shipyards? Well, because you're building them in an existing facility that is very crowded, where there's full operations, where there is 50 years of environmental pollution in the soil, where often you need to build it in the water. So you have to build retaining walls to get the water out, to then build the dry dock in them. Excavating in the dry is 20 times cheaper than excavating in the wet. And so what you could do with an inland bay is you literally reinforce the shoreline, you build everything in the dry, you get it all lined up, you pour the concrete, you do the whole thing, you pop off the side of it and you go. And that is an extendable design. You can do as much of it as you need, and then if you want to add more, you just redo the whole thing. So you can kind of keep building inland as much as you want. Another example is most of the locations, particularly in the Pacific, have earthquake fault lines running underneath them. The reason why Bremerton is so expensive to build in is that it's actually even worse than California, because my understanding is seismically, if you have an earthquake there, you have both a sideways and an upside down motion of the soil. So you can imagine how incredibly expensive is it to build a dry dock that can withstand those pressures. And on Mare Island, there's an earthquake fault line that runs directly underneath the island. Same thing in Pearl Harbor. And there isn't a single earthquake fault line, active one, that runs under the entirety of the 70,000 acres. Not one.
Wow.
And so there's all of these factors that when you lay them on top of each other, it's a really, really incredible place to build.
So do you think, because that's a very big footprint, the shipyard footprint is very big. Mm-hmm. Do you have, is it your preference to have, would you rather have one very large customer, or do you think you'll have, potentially several shipyards operating in the same, general footprint?
Definitely the latter. I mean, I think the way to think about the scale, and we'll put up a little map that shows it, but the shipyard, the historical area that has been designated to maritime industries in Solano County, excluding environmentally sensitive areas, is about 7,500 acres. 7,500 acres for sense of scale. Newport News is about 550 acres. The electric boat shipyards in Rhode Island and Connecticut are about 100 acres each, maybe a little bit more.
So say that number again, 7,500?
7,500.
That's incredible.
So Newport News, 550. Zhongxing Island shipbuilding base in China, which is, everyone talks about how they have a shipyard that built more ships last year than we have in all of our shipyards combined since the end of the Second World War. If you put Zhongxing Island on a map in Solano, it looks kind of small.
Wow.
It's 3,200 acres.
Okay.
So the Solano shipyard is 2.5 times bigger than the biggest shipyard in China. Now, what that means is it's really a shipbuilding complex. And so some of the work that we're doing right now is think about how do we master plan it in a way to accommodate all of the things that might need to happen in shipbuilding in America in the next 50 years. And so some of that would be large shipbuilders, whether U.S. or allied, whether naval or commercial ships. Some of it should certainly be a kind of emerging industries, emerging startups area where someone can come in and lease 20 acres for a startup yard. But then ideally also have a space that they can scale into and expand. I think we'll probably end up thinking about, or we are thinking about, is there an area that we should reserve for a public facility of some kind, if there is a need for an actual naval facility at some point. The Coast Guard doesn't have a West Coast yard. And so we're thinking of should we reserve one for if they decide that they need a West Coast presence.
Gotcha.
And so it's really thinking about the whole ecosystem and then, but also leveraging the scale that we have to think about joint facilities. So some examples that I think could be very powerful, shared ship lifts, shared kind of waterside infrastructure. If there's a foundry built one day, it can obviously supply multiple shipbuilders. Shared kind of a town square facility where people can go and kind of hang out after work or have lunch in a facility that isn't just inside their individual shipyard if they don't work on classified stuff. But also transportation. And all of the infrastructure, but kind of both in the sense of water, wastewater, power, gas, and so on. But then also, if we have 200,000 workers who live in the city 7 miles north of there, how do we run a tram line or a autonomous shuttle series of lines in a way where we've taken away the parking problem, which is a huge issue.
Every shipyard,
shipyards, right? Imagine you didn't have that.
Right.
Imagine you just, particularly for the people who live in the city, and if they can have a 5-10 minute walk or a bike ride to take a shuttle, and the shuttle takes you all the way to your yard. That's an incredible quality of life. I mean, you hear these stories about people who work in a shipyard who get there at 4 a.m. to beat the rush of people trying to park.
Right. So we have a lot of, I think, shipbuilding nerds, other shipbuilding nerds who like this show. And if they were going to go make a pitch, say they have they're going to start a new company. They're going to make a pitch to the investors and say, we're going to do that. They're through the environmental stuff and they could start tomorrow. For a moderate sized facility, what would they tell them in terms of, you think, notional timeline? Like best case, like how, given all the heavy industrial work that would need to happen, the support infrastructure stuff we're talking about, what would they say?
So we've had this discussion. So assume that we are sitting here in 6 months and the regulatory pathway has been altered, where we get to rely on the existing environmental document for building. And so permitting is out of the way. Our engineering firm has drawn up a plan where in 4 to 6 months, we could deliver a finished pad on which you could build a semi-rigid structure and you could start building ships in that. And then we would be able to build the channel, the inland bay that kind of connects to the water over the next 12 to 16 months. So basically, by the time that you finished, you can deliver a pad in 4 to 6 months, you can build your rigid structure, you can start building a ship, and by the time that you finish building the ship, the water has arrived.
Gotcha.
In terms of infrastructure, what's also underappreciated about this site is there are 3 backbone natural gas lines running directly underneath the shipyard. There are 3 major transmission lines running through the site. There's fiber optics that's running underneath the site. The site sits on top of a deep water aquifer that has a bunch of water. So getting water there is you just drill a well. And then we own 70,000 acres around it. And so, for example, for stuff like wastewater, we can start with a packaged plant and we can just do land application of the cleanup water as we build a permanent structure. So for a timeline like that, that does mean that in the beginning, we are starting with some temporary infrastructure for package plant for water, package plant for wastewater, and then we replace that with permanent infrastructure. So I think you could be up and running within, 6 months, you could be building your semi-rigid structure.
When you think about bottlenecks, what's the biggest bottleneck right now? And again, thinking about the shipbuilding and the foundry, what's the biggest bottleneck today?
It's the permission. It's literally just permission built. I mean, the way that I think about it is in any development project, you need the land, you need the people who want to live there or who want to lease office space or factory space there or shipyard space. And you need the capital to build it and you need the permission to build. And we have the first 3 in spades. And so it's really the permission to build. But I think what's exciting for the permission to build is it is the fact that so many companies want to come and build that is speeding up the timeline in terms of the permitting, because the local community now sees that this is not just about building housing, but that actually companies do want to come, which is what we've said from the beginning. But I think seeing specific companies who come and talk to the mayors and say, we want to come here, makes a difference.
That's great. I mean, it feels like there's a resurgence right now of this type of thing. And if you can crack the code in California, you can crack the code anywhere.
Anywhere, exactly. I do think actually that on both the how do you get a project like this of this scale through the system, and then how do you do the economic development around it, but also how do you do high quality urbanism at scale, and how do you build walkable urbanism at scale? I do hope that we can kind of blaze the path a little bit, and then it's easier for other people to follow.
That's great. And so if you had 30 seconds in front of the White House or the Hill, and I'm sure you have those opportunities from time to time, but what's the thing that you want them to hear? You had 30 seconds to tell them something important. What is it?
Build more shipyards. I think we talk about building new ships and hundreds of new ships and supply ships and auxiliaries and tankers, and shipyards are going to be the bottleneck in the system. And the sooner we can get started on building them, the less of a bottleneck they will be in the future. I think that's the workforce you can solve. There's obviously lots of people working on shipbuilding, but all of that sits on top of a physical piece of land that has to be entitled and provisioned with infrastructure, and the sooner we can get started on fixing it, the better.
Is there something that in the news right now, or something that's been happening, particularly on the political side, that's got your interest, that you think is promising for the entire shipbuilding industry?
I don't know that it's one specific thing, although the comments at Reagan this weekend were certainly interesting. I think it feels very much like the next 6 months is going to be kind of a deciding factor in how much we can actually reboot the shipbuilding base. There was a lot of discussion, legislative discussion, executive orders, rhetoric over the last year. And I think everyone is kind of waiting a little bit what that results in over the next 6 months. So I feel like it's going to be quite a ride.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I couldn't agree more. I think we were talking before the show, as a career shipbuilder, for the first 22 years of my career, I had to explain to people what shipbuilding was. Everybody's their highest familiarity came from that scene in Pretty Woman. But in the last year or two, it's become part of our public discourse, and that's very different and exciting. I hope it continues.
Why do you think it took so long for it to become a priority? Like why did the degree to which we were falling behind kind of didn't get picked up for so long?
I mean, I think people knew. I think my guess is that it's really the impetus that we're seeing in tensions in the Far East. It's bringing people to people's. They have been increasing their capacity in China significantly since the 90s. It's been a steady course, but I think recently the numbers say we've got some work to do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And tensions being what they are, I think everyone's paying attention. Good news, there's time. We can fix this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can always count on Americans to do the right thing once they've exhausted all of the other options.
One of my favorite quotes. Is that Churchill?
I think so, yeah. I think that's Churchill.
Well, hey, we really appreciate you coming on today. There's probably 4 more hours of this that I could do, just getting into the nuts and bolts of building not only a shipyard and a foundry, but a city. Where can people find you and follow what you guys are up to?
X.com is probably the best, so you can follow me at Jan Sramek. And then you can subscribe to our newsletter on the website, californiaforever.com.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming by, Jan. It's been a pleasure.
Same here. Thank you.